Hello, welcome to the Planet Premier League podcast with me, Mark Chapman. Lots of big games and big stories to talk about ahead of the next Premier League weekend. Chelsea are hosting Arsenal. Brighton take on Manchester City. We'll also talk about Nottingham Forest's great start to the season. To discuss it all, we're joined. Well, it says here in the script as usual, but Nedum, you couldn't be bothered last week. Where were you?
Couldn't be bothered. Is that a fair thing to say?
Well,
I was in Switzerland,
all
and
right,
unfortunately, the time of recording, I would have been on a flight heading back to Manchester. So,
all right.
unfortunately, the private jet just doesn't work quick enough to get back in time.
I
Wow.
But
say,
I
if you
will endeavour to be
not
here in the
got
future. Yeah.
Wi-Fi on your private jet,
No,
no.
unfortunately not. No. Sorry.
Statman
Mistake.
is with us, and again we're joined by former Chelsea and Brighton manager Graham Potter. How are you, Graham?
I'm very well, thank you. Very well.
Good. Well, and we will talk Chelsea and Brighton a little bit later on. I just want to start with the news that Edu is going to leave Arsenal as their sporting director of football, whatever the title is. We're expecting him to join the football group owned by the Nottingham Forest owner, but just more from a manager's point of view, Graham, because you obviously had a very successful working relationship at Brighton with a sporting director, and that role works brilliantly. At Chelsea, you had 27 different sporting directors, of course. But what does it mean for a manager when the director of football goes? Is it slightly disorientating?
I would say it slightly is, in my experience, it was slightly. But then at the same time, because the club had identified people within the club, there was a bit of contingency planning going on anyway. So David Weir came into the club and he carried on the role that Dan did. Although they do it in a slightly different way, because clearly no one's the same. They do the role the same, but they'll bring their own identity and their own stamp to it. So I'm guessing at Arsenal they'll have had people that they know either within the club or externally that they'll be thinking about replacing. But it'll still be a little bit of a, I think there's always a little bit of uncertainty, a little bit of working out. Okay, how's this going to go? What strengths are going to come to the club, and how we adapt to that. That's going to be the next challenge for them.
I realise as a football manager, you have a lot of input into how your squad is put together. But I've also seen reports. Well, this might mean Mikel Arteta having more responsibility, more power for the manager. Less on the power question, but on actually more work for Mikel Arteta. Is it feasible in this day and age, if you're a Premier League manager or a head coach, to actually do the recruitment as well? Or do you think that's... I know you have that input, but do you think you need a sporting director now?
I think you need somebody, certainly. I think if you're a head coach in the Premier League or any team, in my opinion, your main job is, and if you do it right, is to look after the 25 players that are there on the pitch day in, day out, and that's a big job in itself, and to select them and to make sure that they're periodised, to make sure they're trained properly, etc., etc. So then, if all of a sudden then you've got to make decisions around recruitment in the short term, medium term, long term, identify players, have the conversations that are required to make the best decisions possible. I just don't see how you can do it.
Dave, the interesting thing with Edu as well is you look at the side that were beaten at Newcastle at the weekend. 10 of that 11 were signed under his watch. The 11th was Bukayo Saka, who came through the academy. So that's the influence that he has had on putting that squad together over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's completely changed Arsenal's makeup. I think when he came into the club, the squad was around, in terms of value, estimated around 600 million euros. And now it's over a billion or 1.5 billion. And you look at the recruitment, lots of players that are 22, a lot of players that are 23. And sort of, the last few transfer windows, Arsenal haven't done much, but they've spent money really well. And again, I think it goes down to the influence of a sporting director with the manager and the team that Arsenal have built together. So I think the next transfer window could be quite interesting to see where Arsenal go. Do they go for a different approach, or do they continue with the work that Arsenal have been doing?
I actually think the other thing in all of this, Nedum, is, which is less Arsenal-centric, but bigger picture-centric. Arsenal will be looking for a new one. Manchester City will get a new one in the summer. Liverpool got a new one last summer. Manchester United is new since this summer because of the work. There are a lot of the big clubs who have got big change at that level, actually.
Yeah, for sure. And at those clubs as well, they're big boots to fill. To talk about, say, Chika Begiristain for Man City, he's been huge in terms of how successful the club's been in years gone by. And for Edu, as you said, so many of those players have come under his tenureship as such. And it is an interesting thing because from the Arsenal side of things, whereas with Man City, to a certain extent, other clubs, like somebody left at the end of a season or, it's an expected point, for him to be leaving at this stage of a season, and some reports saying it's because of a disagreement about the just strategic sort of setup for Arsenal going forward. I wonder what the disagreement is. But also, maybe he's looked at the league table and seen Forest ahead, and he's decided this is a better place for me. That's it's funny how football works, isn't it? But yeah, it's I don't think you'd want this disruption at this point in the season. But I'm sure he's going to do his best to make sure the transition's as smooth as possible.
Also, the move that he's being linked with is to become the chief exec of the football group that's owned by Marinakis. So that's Nottingham Forest, that's Rio Ave in Portugal, Olympiacos, and then there's rumours that they're going to add a fourth club to that. And that again, Graham, is a structure that you have worked within, which is that the multi-club group. How much does being part of a multi-club group influence you in your role?
I don't think it influences the manager necessarily so much, or the head coach. I mean, there'll be, I suppose, there'll be pathways that you can use. You're aware of signing players that that there's a club for them to go to if they don't, fit into the first team plans at that moment. I think for more the guys that are in the technical director, sporting director positions, I think speaking to a few, it's almost like there's an intellectual challenge of piecing it together. So now, not only are you now trying to create a squad and depth for a squad at a Premier League club, you're now trying to think about it from 3 or 4 different clubs. And so, maybe there's an intellectual challenge there, which is the next step up for them. But as a coach, I think you've got enough to worry about with the 25 that you've got there. You can't think about players and stuff in different clubs.
But then I suppose it all depends where you are within that hierarchy of the football group, doesn't it? Because there will be, I would imagine, Nedum, if you are viewed as the third rung team within that football group, you might want to be constantly picking the brains of the Premier League team within that group.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think it's 2 times I've had to do this, but like with Man City and their City football group, like Man City are the central hub to it. So they do have quite a few other teams in different countries set up in different ways, but there's always this sort of transfer of ideas as such. They're always trying to see how they can improve in their situations. And it does work 2 ways as well, because, for example, we've seen some young players go on loan to like a Lommel from another one of the clubs that got ownership with City Football Group. So I think there is a chance to work together, a chance to have different ideas, and not every idea works in every single space. So it can be a bit more complex. But I think for Edu, feels if it does end up being that he goes there, and it's weird talking about Edu, he's got a move linked, he's linked with a move, but he's the director. You know what I mean?
This is the world we're in now.
Is this Edu the player, Edu the sporting director? Is there a transfer market for sporting directors? Is this what's going on?
There will be
But
soon.
yes, there's every chance. But I think, I think there is a ranking. You can pretend that there's not, but everyone knows that there is. And whether it's going to be budget based, whether it's going to be success based, maybe it's about the nature of the league itself. And I think for this, you say the football group, is that what they're called?
I haven't got there exactly.
Yeah, super. It's very creative. Does exactly what it says on the tin. They are the football group, and they'll control a bunch of teams. And Edu, I'm sure, will have his interests on making sure that he does a good job for them.
The hierarchy can be difficult, though, can't it, Graham? I know you. I'm going to give an example here, but a made up one. If you're head coach at Chelsea and want a Strasbourg player, that's a lot easier than if you're head coach at Strasbourg and want a Chelsea player, I'm guessing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the challenge is for the teams lower down the hierarchy, which, as Nedum says, there is. Supporters don't want to feel that they're, in some sort of service to some other club somewhere else in a far off country somewhere else, no matter how big it is. They don't like that feeling. They want to feel like everything is, geared towards doing the best for them. And if there is a sense that we're compromising ourselves for the greater good of the the main team, I don't think that's particularly helpful, and I think that's the bit that they have to try to work out, the identity of the teams and understanding and educating everybody as to what are the benefits to this. Because as Nedum said again, just because you've got a good idea, say City, it doesn't mean that it's going to transfer to the context in the second tier in Belgium or whatever it is.
Graham, I've been thinking about this for a very long time, and to have like a Premier League manager on here is terrific. Yeah. So historically,
God,
Building me up
brace
here.
yourself, Graham.
Yeah,
This is interesting.
It's only my second session. This, come on, guys.
Historically, I think fans of football clubs have always thought that a manager comes into a club and they decide who they want to buy. They've got the pick and they get backed by the football club. Whereas in probably the last 5 to 10 years, it feels like the club has an identity in terms of players that they want to bring in, and a manager can have the final say on the players who the club have already selected. Which system do you think is more prevalent in today's sort of football, and which system do you think is better?
Well, I think I don't think it's the days where the manager decides which. Certainly, in my experience, anyway, the manager decides who they want to sign, and I think there's a positive to that, because, as I said earlier, the manager's surely is looking all the time at his own players, devoting all those energy and time to that. So to have the capacity to make the decisions, to look all around the world to decide, okay, based on different criteria, age, finance, contract length, transfer fee, to make all those decisions to say, yeah, that's the best guy at this time. It feels to me like that's impossible. At the same time, clubs, if they work in isolation and don't use the manager, I think that's a mistake as well, because clearly you need to align things together. You can't just go, recruitment's the solution. Everything's they're going to solve all our problems, because that's not the case. It certainly wasn't the case at Brighton. It's about collaborating the two, because if you're bringing in a player, you need to know, okay, when that player comes in, because no player comes in that's perfect. The player always has strengths and weaknesses. So the coach then needs to understand, okay, how do we use these strengths and weaknesses to make the best of this recruitment? Because the player on its own is not going to solve anything. There's so many times you make a mistake of thinking, I'll watch this player from this environment, from this context, and think, okay, he's going to do exactly what he's doing there. But you might play differently. Your style is differently. Your culture is differently. Your environment's different. The league's different, etc., etc. So you really need to understand from both sides how it works. And I think that's probably where the coach, manager, head coach, whatever it is, needs to work closely with the recruitment team and align themselves with the recruitment team in order to make the best, most competent decisions. Because in the end, if you're making poor decisions on the recruitment, you're going to struggle.
So, question there, Graham, like how much do you watch that player? So the recruitment team comes to you, and do you go to games? You spend time watching the video, and kind of, when you're integrating that player, how much of his previous kind of performances are you thinking about when you're integrating him into your side?
Well, in my case, I've always had somebody within my staff that's been focused on recruitment, which is quite unusual, and it's something that clubs are a little bit concerned with initially. But certainly for the last 12 years, I've had somebody working closely with me from recruitment. So he does all that thinking, he does all those conversations with the recruitment team, because otherwise, what's the opposite? What's the alternative in the middle of the January transfer window, when your Christmas period, you're the busiest? The recruitment team goes, "Hey, Graham, here's a list of 3 or 4 players. Give me your opinion on this." And all of a sudden, you're like, "Well, how much work can I actually do on this? And how valuable is my opinion really? Because how much time am I able to spend on this decision?" Because really, again, it's about the time you spend on the decision and making the best decision. And you have to have I've been fortunate that I've had somebody that knows me, knows the environment, knows how I want to play. So therefore, he can have the conversation with the recruitment team, which can go on for hours and hours and hours, by the way, that I just can't have as the head coach. You just haven't got the time for those decisions, those conversations. And in the end, those conversations is just gathering information, it's gathering data. It's enabling you to go, okay, when we need to execute this decision, when we need to make a call on player A versus player B, have we weighed everything up? Have we spoke to everybody in the right way? Have we brought all the things together, and boom, which is the best way we go here?
What's more mischievous is asking, did you go into a club knowing that you wanted to get rid of players already? Because
Mark, come
Chapman, you're a
on.
bad fella, mate. You're a bad fella.
Second podcast. Come on, Chappers.
I can see how this is going. You're all nice to me on the first one, and now the second one comes, and I'm getting all these. I like it, guys.
I was thinking if I was going in as sporting director at Manchester United, I'd be like,
I keep thinking Statman Dave. I keep thinking Dave's drinking a pint of lager there, but he's not.
Yeah, well,
it's fair enough.
It might be lager. You never know this time in the morning. Let's look ahead to, as I said, lots of big games this weekend. Chelsea Arsenal is Sunday at 4:30. And from an Arsenal point of view, I know we've touched on Edu, but the other thing here, Nedum, is they're just what I would always how I sort of describe it. They're just having a little bit of a wobble, aren't they?
Yeah, I think a little bit of a wobble is the best way to describe it. But it's coming at a time when Liverpool are very close to perfect. So I'm thinking, so early in the season, and it's only November. But then I look at the table and it's 7 points. And 7 points, if it's in the middle of, if it's mid-table, I think one team could significantly fall out of form and the other one find something. But in some of these title races, which is what we assume Arsenal will be expecting, well, not expecting, but hoping to do this season, that's a lot of ground to make up. You can win your games and you're still 3 positions behind the team that's in first. And I think to add to it as well, they only play Liverpool once more, and it just so happens to be at Anfield. So from that sort of head-to-head, if I'm just talking about those 2 teams, the pressure is very much on. And I think for Arsenal, so obviously we're recording on this Tuesday morning, for Arsenal to be playing Inter Milan and to be playing Chelsea away in these next 2 games, I think it's a good read to see where they're at, because they have been inconsistent. But here are 2 really tough challenges. And if they come through these, say with 2 wins, obviously it's in 2 different competitions, I think they'll have a ton of belief as they go away on international duty. Whereas if it goes the other way, they're going away and it's like, well, what's next? And obviously the next stage of the season is as tough as it comes. I think Graham said himself, there's so much football to be played. No more international breaks after this till March. But I think 2 strong wins sets the tone, but I also think 2 defeats really does leave you asking some significant questions, especially if some of their rivals win this weekend as well.
I kind of feel like an awful lot of football's been played already, and then it's like we're only 10 games in.
I'm tired, Chappers. I'm tired, mate. Honestly, I can't keep talking about this.
The thing up until the Newcastle defeat, Graham, when I was talking about Arsenal with people, that they hadn't really dropped that many points. They'd drawn at home to Brighton. They'd been down to 10 in that game. They'd drawn against Liverpool. They got the draw at City when they were down to 10 and maybe felt they could have held on. The only outlier a little bit was the defeat at Bournemouth, which might have raised eyebrows. Bournemouth have subsequently beaten Manchester City. But if you look at the Premier League table at the moment, there's 4 points between 3rd and 10th or 11th. So if teams are more competitive and it's squeezing up, you might be able to go back to like the good old days when you maybe lost 4, 5, 6 games and could still win the title. Do you think?
I think so. This season, yeah. And I think if you look at the top 4 and going into this weekend's game, I think for the first time for a while, Chelsea will be favourites for the game, purely because like what Nedum was saying around, if you look what the difference between Chelsea and Arsenal this week in terms of European competition, Arsenal won't be able to rotate anybody. They've got to absolutely play everyone to the max. It's a Champions League game. Into Milan, Chelsea can rotate all their 11 pretty much for the European game that they're in, and so or they've got a free week, whatever it is. So it's a real big advantage for Arsenal, I think. And injuries, I think, have played a big part in this season so far. If you look at Man City, where they're at, how they've struggled with it, Arsenal have struggled with it a little bit. So the form of both 2 teams, the rhythm of both 2 teams is not quite there. Look at Liverpool, they've been pretty okay, and Chelsea have been okay as well. So it's going to be those factors, I think, will play a big part in it.
Dave, do you, on Arsenal, what are the stats with and without Odegaard?
So I think that is the massive problem. One thing that I'd just like to jump in and highlight here, Chappers, in terms of shots on target, Arsenal had 0 against Newcastle. And if you look over the last 3 seasons, that's only happened 3 times, once against Manchester City, once against Porto, and Porto really nullified them on the flanks. But when you look at the chances created this season, obviously Odegaard's around 3 per game. So he's really making things happen in the final third. You look at the Arsenal squad, Bukayo Saka's created 28 chances in the Premier League this season, which is the joint most in the league. But the next player is Declan Rice, and a lot of those chances have come from set pieces. And if you go a little bit further and you look at that Newcastle game, they didn't really penetrate Newcastle very well. There was the one chance probably at the end of the game for Declan Rice. And you look around it and you see what's happening. I think there is a real problem without Martin Odegaard, and the win rates obviously dropped massively down. Similar with Saliba as well. His impact in the side's been big. He's missed a game for a red card. So there's a lot of different things with Arsenal right now that just don't quite work. The question would be, someone like a Wanyeri who's come through the academy, scored a lot of goals from outside the box, got ability to pick a pass. Why has he maybe not played the minutes? I think is an interesting question.
Why has he not played the minutes? Who would he be playing the minutes instead of? Are you thinking of Trossard?
Trossard, or you could maybe drop one of the defensive midfielders and play him in that area
Which one?
instead.
Because you love Marino not that long
I do
ago.
like Mikel Moreno. Mikel Moreno is a very good footballer. So it probably would be Trossard that you'd look at. Maybe put Trossard wide left, maybe rotate him with Martinelli. Just think there's a little bit of a lack of creativity in there.
So, Graham, this is Statman Dave. Before, when he was talking about say recruitment, he was sort of like angling for a job because basically he watches lots of hours of football and players and like, oh, this is going to fit in this system. So he's discovered a role for himself. And with Nwaneri, like I could see him getting a chance to play, but again, it's similar to lots of discussions about other players. It's always, well, instead of whom. And then all of a sudden, people aren't so assertive anymore. It says, well, maybe this, maybe that. And I can see his potential. But Arteta's somebody who, across the last few seasons, there are players that he trusts and he sticks with them. You know, even, say at times, players who, two seasons ago, you're seeing Zinchenko, you're seeing Gabriel Jesus, and they're starting every game. The next season, it's like, well, it's not quite the same anymore. But there's certain players who we will pick because he understands how they're going to respond in pretty much any situation. And for Nwaneri, he could be really, really good. But is he going to be the person that solves all of Arsenal's problems right now? I'm not sure. He has the potential to be. But these next two games, for example, I'd be surprised if he started over somebody that's more experienced like a Trossard. And it's not to say that he won't play and be significant for the rest of the season, but it's never really that simple. Everyone always knows what they want, but they just don't know how to get it. That's the issue.
And the thing, also the bit about that as well, in terms of squad build and recruitment again, it's like it's impossible to have two Martin Odegaards, you know, because they've got to both play. So you can't say, well, if Odegaard he's just unlucky if Odegaard gets injured, and then you've got to think about, okay, how does the makeup of our team change, and what sort of patterns do we have in midfield to adjust to the loss of him. And I suppose that's where they've tried to find it. You know, all of a sudden you've got Partey, Rice, Marino. It's not the same creativity as when obviously, but they'll be hopeful that over time those relationships will build up and it starts to become quicker and quicker. The decision making starts to become quicker and quicker, and they can make those incisive passes or assists or whatever it is. But I think while you're dealing with the loss of such an influential player at the first place, is always a problem.
That's a real interesting thing with the influential player then, Graham, because you're sort of saying whilst within a squad, ideally you want two players for every position, there are certain players.
Impossible.
There are certain players that you can't have a replica of or an understudy for because they'll never play because they're so important to you. Tottenham had it for years, didn't they, with Harry Kane? They never really had a backup striker because people didn't really want to go there because they knew that they wouldn't play because Harry Kane would always play.
And again, I think you just got to be clever with your recruitment and how your squad builds. So if you think back, I don't know, Liverpool, there wasn't another Salah and there wasn't another Mane. They just were creative around how they use the front three if one of those were down. You see at Man City, in the end, was it Alvarez sort of got fed up a little bit with playing the reserve to Haaland to a certain extent, probably. So it isn't easy to do because there isn't a second Van Dijk. There's not if he goes down, even at the big clubs, if they lose these players, if you lose Odegaard for 3-4 months, it's a problem for you to win the title because it's that crucial to how you want to go from a creativity perspective. That there isn't just another one there that you can say, okay, you get lucky with a youth team player or somebody coming through that is that genius that's coming through, but it isn't so easy.
Well, that leads us very nicely on to Manchester City, who are at Brighton. So we'll look ahead to that next, and we'll talk about Nottingham Forest. So there are some big games this weekend. One at the bottom, Wolves against Southampton, which is a Saturday afternoon game, is a huge game. You also feel that West Ham against Everton will be big as well. Brighton are taking on Manchester City, so let's discuss that. We'll do most of this on Brighton, but just on City. And Graham Nedum mentioned Alvarez. After Haaland this season, City's next top scorer, I think I'm right in saying, is Gvardiol, isn't it, Dave? I
Yep.
think. So, obviously, you get the goals with Haaland, but you need others to chip in, don't you? And the rest of those attacking players, attacking midfielders, haven't yet.
Yeah, you're right. They haven't. I think we've seen a slow start for Phil Foden this season as well for multiple reasons, especially after being so successful last year. And you do need others to chip in. And in fairness, if they did, like I think they're one goal behind being second top scorers in the division anyway. And obviously Haaland has 10 of those, but by themselves, the 11 that they have with the other players, it's okay. But we can see that they've got more there in terms of players being able to have a bigger impact. You don't want to get to a position, in my opinion, where everything's just down to the nine, down to the nine. If he doesn't score, then you can't win, or if Vardiol doesn't score, then you can't win. But I think in time they will find a way. But we're not seeing the best of them right now for multiple reasons, whether it's to do with injury and whether it's to do with people not being informed, people having slow starts after the European competition and so on in the summer. Because I don't know if Dave's got a stat for that, but I feel like quite a few people who played in that final for England, like they've not really done much this season as it stands. Quite a few, obviously not all of them.
Across different clubs.
Across different clubs,
Just by watching, it feels like a few of them have started slowly.
Yeah, and that's what some of that, maybe it's to do with like injury, maybe it's to do with just not having like a full preseason, and maybe it could be so many other things. But yeah, they've not been as dynamic and exciting as they finished the season just gone. And City, there is a concern there. The goal scoring side of things, the fact that teams are breaking on them with good speed, and they've got teams got real structure and idea of how they want to try and play against them, not just to not lose the game, but to try and win it. But these are the tests that they've faced before. These are the tests that they'll come up against again. And I think in Guardiola, he's going to look at it and try and just create a system which will give them the best chance of winning, which has historically proven to be quite successful.
Quite important to put this into context, Dave, really, in that defeat at Bournemouth was their first in the league for what, 30 odd games, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was big. But Bournemouth, we mentioned before, really good side at the moment. You mentioned they've taken
You haven't
7.
got that stat, have you? Because you just changed the subject.
Yeah, it's called filling, yeah. That's what we do, yeah.
I was going to go around the houses and we were going to come back to that.
Don't, hang on, because I think, you can come back to it in a minute. But it was the first in 30, I think. And then the defeat against Tottenham in the League Cup was their first in any competition in 40 odd or 50 or something like that. So,
hold on, we forget the FA Cup final in these City unbeaten runs, no?
Oh yeah, that's
did that not happen?
Nedum,
were you there?
You, mate.
Yeah, I had a sensational day.
Mate, I was there the year before. I was there the year before. Remember that one?
Nah, not that one, mate.
The point in all of this, we don't need the exact stats. They don't lose very often. So there has to be some context to this discussion of what's wrong with Manchester City, Dave.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, part of it is Haaland. And since they played Arsenal in the Premier League, he's had 5 games, missed 6 big chances, only scored 1 goal and got 0 assists. That for him is poor numbers, but that's the standards that he's set himself. And I think when you look around that City team, it's interesting and it's got to be a creative solution. But Mateus Nunes, Nedum, has been pretty sensational, directly involved in 5 goals in the last 4 games. Is he someone that could solve that problem for them?
He definitely seems like he's getting better and better. I think last season, he probably didn't get enough game time for people to really see the best of him. You could see he was never really in flow, and maybe he played in the occasional cup competition or got like 20 minutes at the end. But at the moment, you probably make the case that he's been City's best player in the recent weeks. And it's, that tends to be an accolade which would carry more weight when they're doing really well. But the fact is, he's been exciting for them. He's been somebody who can take the ball up the pitch. I thought he was very good against Spurs. And I think as the weeks pass, he's starting to understand like what his role is within the team. He's very dynamic. He's good on the ball. He's looking to always be on the front foot, and he works hard as well. And even though, as I say, City haven't been at their absolute best, I think he's been a bright spark, which have given people hope to where, come the end of the season, if all the players are fit and available, I think he's a real significant option because he gets it. But as you said, and as Chappers has said, it feels like a slight overreaction to talk about a team that's lost for the first time in 30, but it's like a really sneaky 30 because it doesn't feel like it's happened. But yeah, it certainly has happened, and it's going to bring a good reaction, and I think they'll need it going away to Brighton this weekend as well.
Graham, you were going to come in?
I just look at Man City and they won't want to make injuries as an excuse. Pep will make a absolute effort to do that. The players won't. But when you look, there's no Rodri, there's no Grealish, there's no Stones, there's no Diaz, there's no De Bruyne, and they're going through this where they're talking about how many players they've got out. I know from experience how destabilizing that is, because it affects how you train, it affects the mentality of the group. All of a sudden everyone's looking around going, we've only got 4 or 5 training today. It's not quite the same. They won't want to make it as an excuse, but as a manager who's not working, I think I can make the excuse for them. That it really is difficult. It stops your flow. It stops. Now people will go, yeah, but they've got this great squad and etc. But it doesn't matter. I think when you lose that type of player for those many, it can affect you, certainly at the top end.
We had a discussion on the radio last night about one of Guardiola's other comments was, we're playing 70 games a season. It's like the NBA, but the NBA, they get 4 months off holiday. We get 3 weeks off holiday. And I was interested in the psychological side of this. Last week after Tottenham, he said, "Oh, we've only got 13 fit players." Can you talk yourselves into feeling tired and not feeling injured, but but that sort of, but that we're struggling.
Yeah. I think you've got to be careful with that for sure, because everyone will be feeling it, and you've got to. A lot of the messages coming out of City is we're not going to use it as an excuse. We're not going to use it as an excuse, and of course they can say that, but in the back of their mind they'll go, oh yeah, but I'd rather have Stones fit. I'd rather have De Bruyne fit. I'd rather, everyone knows that with those players, Nedum will know as a player, if you're there and you've got 20 odd players on your squad training every day, you're looking around, there's competition, everyone's fighting for a place. That's a better position to be in than you're 5 or 6 and you're trying to get through a training session and try not to injure each other because you're the only fit ones that are playing. There's a completely different mindset to that. So, yeah, they've got to be careful.
That's not just professional football, Graham. That's pub football as well. Trust me. You turn up for a midweek training session. 4 of them have got stuck in traffic. A couple of them are hungover. All of a sudden,
I've been there.
I know. Move on. Brighton were very unlucky at Anfield, weren't they, Dave? If you look at the stats here, I mean, they could have been 2 or 3-0 up at half time.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the Brighton that we see this season is very, very offensive. But the goals are spread through the team. They've got 10 different goal scorers in the Premier League this season, which is more than any other side in Europe's top 5 leagues. And they played really well. And I thought Liverpool adapted well to Brighton. And Brighton, obviously, this high line that we spoke about, which, gets criticised, but they've got the most offsides in the Premier League, which I'd put down to a very, very positive stat. It's not at Barcelona levels, but it's still very, very, very good. So there's a side to Brighton that I really appreciate, but they were definitely in that game at Anfield, and they will continue to do that. And
you would expect them, Nedum, to have a go at City, wouldn't you? Bournemouth had a go, but Bournemouth could have had 3 or 4 against Manchester City. Actually, at the weekend before City got back into it, they're not going to be on the back foot in this.
No, they won't be on the back foot. But I think for the way that City play, City will try and have good possession in the opposition's half. So at times it might look like they're in that sort of block. But for me, the sign of one of those really good sides is, well, how do they deal with things in transition? Even though they want to play their football, I think they'll understand that there's going to be space, and they've got speed in their team. Whether it's Mitoma or whether it's Rutter. Shout out to Danny Welbeck, still got half a yard as well. They will try and stretch the game. So yeah, they won't be on the back foot. The crowd will know that they've got a real good opportunity to go and beat Man City, which is something that most teams don't do very often. So they'll be up for it. They'll know that it's a big statement win just before the international break, and you can leave in a really good moment, really good feeling. So they will take it to them. I don't think they'll take it to them to the point where it's to their own detriment, but I'd imagine most of the fan base will be hoping they don't have a moment like they did 2 games ago against Wolves, where all of a sudden it's 4v1, and then next thing you've just conceded a goal and it's 2-2. Yeah. But I'm sure that the manager will be learning himself, and he'll be coaching those players to understand what's needed in this game, because it might not be the same as, say, games gone by.
They will, won't they, Graham? They will be arriving thinking they've got a chance here. The fan base as well.
Yeah, they will absolutely 5:30 kickoff Saturday evening. I don't think City can have the excuse of the injuries. I don't want to keep banging on about them, but Brighton have got their own problems as well. So it's there's no excuses going into the game for that. It'd be interesting with Brighton, even though they've scored a lot of goals, which Dave's right. They've also conceded quite a few as well. So it's going to be quite an interesting game in terms of the last 8 games. Brighton have conceded 17 goals. So they've scored the goals, but they've also conceded. So it'll be interesting to see how they adapt to City's patient approach.
Do you think they will adapt? Because they strike me as a team who have their way, like several in the Premier League, have their way of playing, and this is what they're going to do.
I think they will to a certain extent, but without going away from what the coach wants them to be and wants them to play like. I think they are still adapting to the new coach and the new coach's ideas. They're not quite at the moment. They've got Kadioglu as one of the wide players because Minter's been injured. They're not using Dringer in that position, so they're not quite the 2 high wide players that they were maybe we used to be seeing with De Zerbi, for example. Bit more 4-4-2 defensively, a bit more of a focus on the defensive side of the game. So there's still adaptation going on, and that adaptation isn't so easy when you're losing the likes of Dung, João Pedro, Webster, Milner. There are all these players that again it just makes it more complicated. Sounds like I'm making excuses for managers here all the time.
No, I don't think you are at all. Chappers, to go to you, when you say like they have a style of play and they don't really adapt, what does that mean in detail in your perception of, say, football? Because I think I hear a lot of people saying that, but I need to know exactly what they mean.
Well, in the sense that we talk about the high line, we talk about their philosophy there, and we also talk about the fact that they will try and be on the front foot. And you see a lot of teams, or in the past you have seen a lot of teams sit with a deep line against Manchester City, try and play a 5-4-1 and hit them on the counter, or barely get out of their own half against them. And I think actually this season, probably helped by some early goals, more teams have decided we might be able to do something here. And City have had problems at home against Ipswich, they've had problems at home against Brentford, against Fulham, which I think in the past, and Southampton actually, to be honest, where that was only 1-0. And I think you've seen teams in the past 5, 6, 7 years take on Manchester City and go, right, try and break us down, and in the end concede 80% possession, and you can't keep it up like that. And the exception to that, I would say, was some of the old Wolves teams who did stick with a sort of back 3 and try and hit Manchester City on the counter attack.
Yeah, I think it's. I find that to be really interesting, because
Do you
I think
not
at
think
times
that's the case over
no,
many years
I think
with City?
no, I think
Teams that play City, rather.
I think every game that City play brings out a certain response from the teams that they play against because those teams know the value of that win. So I think some teams are more prepared to adapt to dealing with the issues which City will cause them in any particular moment. I think sometimes some teams probably adapt too much and spend so much time focusing on how they're going to defend that they forget that there's also an opportunity to attack. But I don't think a team like Brighton or, say, Bournemouth and so on, I don't think they go too far away from their principles because they know that that's what gives them the best chance to win. I think gone are the days where some teams, the ones who sit probably middle of the table towards the top half, will just think, oh, let's try and get away with a draw here. They know they can win. These players, for me, they're very well coached individually and collectively. So you can try and, you just, like, the high line is for a reason. The way that they play is for a reason. And I think we don't get the chance to have enough people come and talk about what the reason is, which will then explain why they have a certain approach. And sometimes, for the way football is, Graham knows this very clearly as well. We all do. You can have a plan and set it up for the weekend and it could go well, but you might still lose. But then you'll be critiqued for the plan, even though with a few things going your way, maybe you win the game. So I prefer to see Brighton not move away from their identity and have certain tweaks to their philosophy, but still be the same team, because that identity is the reason why they'll be going into the game believing they've got a chance to win, as opposed to historically teams just setting up and doing everything they can to just not lose the game. Like, I'll be honest, when I've seen some teams play, and obviously City pin you back, like some of the best teams, they pin you back because they move the ball so well. The counter press is great, the positioning is great. But I think to myself sometimes, like, people from the outside must believe that a team of good players in the Premier League want to not touch the ball for 20 minutes at a time. They want to just, like, you want your number 10 just charging about left to right, trying to make tackles. Absolutely not. They want to win the game. So that's why I think, for me personally, I think some managers overdo it in focusing on City and they forget themselves. But the best teams for me who are likely to beat City are the ones who also think about themselves and trying to win the game, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, we basically said the same thing, didn't we? Just I said it 2 minutes shorter.
Oh, wow. Okay. Right. Somebody cut that bit out there. Okay, cool. No worries.
no, that's
Let me mute my mic. Sorry. My bad, chappers. Hands up. My bad.
Well, I think it's a bit of a mistake. We haven't asked a coach that's played Manchester City in the Premier League. Graham, how do you set Brighton up when you were manager there? Going back to one of the games, a 3-2 win at home where you came from 2 goals down. What was your approach at the start of that game, if you remember, and how did you change it?
Yeah, we chose to be aggressive. We chose to try to be ourselves, the best version of ourselves. To be aggressive, to play our game with our principles. I mean, obviously it helped us because Man City got a man sent off after, I think, 10, 15 minutes. So therefore it made things a lot easier. But nevertheless, that was always it was always our approach throughout whenever we played. You just know that the quality of Man City is that whatever you do against them, they can just beat you anyway. It's because they're one of the best teams in the world. So for us, it was more about, okay, but based on that, based on our qualities, based on what we can do, how can we set up a game plan that gives us a chance to win, to maintain what we're doing over the longer term, to maintain our building of our team and building of our idea. And that's how we went about it. Like I said, you have to think of something. You have to think of something different. That's what I always think about when I play those types of teams. You have to think about, without going away from what you're doing. And this is the trick. It's like, because you want to be able to go and continue to work towards your game and your idea, but there'll need to be an adaptation to the opponent. You just don't want to adapt too much, because then the players go, hang on a minute, we're not believing in what we're doing now. And that's the trick.
That's the point there. I think a player seeing a manager decide to just go a 180 on stuff which they said was the most important thing. As soon as they do it once, people believe they're going to do it again. You start to lose the belief. And again, the bit before, when we're talking about versatility and so on, we've seen it historically in the Premier League. Do you know when people be going to like Highbury, or they're going to some of these places which at the time for like 10 years was an impossible place to go to, and they've got their back 5 in for this game where usually they play a back 4. They've got like no striker now, everyone's in, bedded in, and then 5 minutes in they concede, and then everyone's like, well, that was fun. That's fun while it lasted. That's too versatile. That's too much of a change from what they were before. And lo and behold, now that they're losing, they don't know what to do next.
Sorry. Just finally, quickly, there's lots of evidence though that teams do park the bus and get a result, and then all of a sudden, so then the flip side to that is, when you do go and be yourself and you do try and play your game, and you lose, people call you naive and stupid. So you can't win unless you win. You can't win.
Should be the title of this episode. You can't win. Just a quick couple on Nottingham Forest to finish. I'm sure we'll expand on them over coming weeks, particularly if they stay where they are. Goes back to started with talking about recruitment. Goes back to recruitment as well before we come on to Nuno. I wonder, Dave, whether signing Milinkovic in the summer was probably the biggest piece of business that they did. You talk to Nottingham Forest fans, they talk about didn't win everything in the air really last season, and now they've got this brilliantly complementary central defensive partnership.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Murillo as well deserves a lot of credit for his mobility to play with him. But the Milinkovic signing was weird because he seemed to be a player that could play for a top side, good on the ball. But as you mentioned, so dominant. He's winning around 4.2 aerial duels per game in the Premier League, which puts him in the top 1% of centre-backs in Europe's top 5 leagues. He is so dominant in those areas and perfect for the Premier League. And Nottingham Forest have got a great defender. And going to the sort of defensive statistics, in 2024, Forest have been excellent in the numbers. This season, the Premier League obviously just conceded 7 goals. But if you look at expected goals conceded, they're also ranked 3rd in the Premier League. So not only are they keeping the clean sheets and not conceding the goals, but they're doing it the right way and defending really well.
Well, they also have a goal scorer, Graham, and Chris Wood, don't they?
They do, yeah. He's on fire. But actually, their front 4, if you look at Alanga, Gibbs White, Hudson-Odoi, added to the defensive organisation that Nuno brings, which Dave's alluded to, I think they've been really smart. They're not a team that presses high. They'll give people a chance to build up. They'll allow them to come up the pitch a little bit, so it enables them to attack with big spaces with attacking fast players. So they've got a combination of Gibbs White, I think, is a good 10, fast wingers that can hurt you on transition, and if you want to put the ball in the box in the old-fashioned way, Chris Wood is there to score goals. So I think they've done really well. They've got a long throw, as we mentioned earlier before we came on air. So they've got a bit of everything. It's fantastic so far for them.
Also, sometimes Nedum, Nuno can be. People sort of look at Nuno and what happened at Tottenham and forget what he did at Wolves. Not only getting Wolves promoted, but then Wolves into the top of the Premier League, Wolves into Europe, an FA Cup semi-final. He knows how to build promoted teams into Premier League teams.
Yes, and do we call that Spurs thing Premier League snobbery? Is that what we should call it? That's definitely it's definitely a thing because he was really good for Wolves. Having seen what they were like in the Championship, having seen what they were like in the Premier League for those first couple of seasons, like this is a Wolves side. I'm pretty sure they were playing in Europe, weren't they? Which was
Yeah.
a huge,
They're in the
huge
Europa League,
achievement for them. In fact, just a huge achievement in general. So for him to go to Forest, especially replacing Cooper, who was kind of very well liked, even though Premier League wise the team wasn't really performing as the fan base would have hoped overall. But he went in, didn't feel like the biggest appointment again because of the Premier League snobbery, and now he's doing something which we'd seen him do before with a team that's defensively very solid, like his old Wolves side, who can also hit you in transition and score goals like his old Wolves side. And I can see that he's, I don't know, maybe Graham disagrees or agrees with this, but like we always talk about players who can get better over time, but never we talk about managers doing the same thing. You learn from those experiences, it seems like, and every situation you're now in is different. You're coming into a new dressing room, but maybe you know a way to manage certain moments, a way to get the team to play. Like you've now been involved in way more games in the Premier League, and I think we can see that with Forest. And they're a really good side. We've gone from talking about them signing 30 players a window 2 seasons ago to them now signing 1 or 2 really key players going forward. But also some of those players have been there for a little while now, and you can see their benefit. And when we should have bought stock in Forest was after they beat Liverpool at Anfield. But instead, I think some of us think, it's probably a fluke. Their bubble will burst. But instead, here they are, and they probably won't finish in the top 10 or whatever. But they're a really good side. And to quote something that Dave and I were speaking about at the end of last season, when it was a case of deciding who was likely to go down, I remember seeing the stats, and Forest's defensive record was really good. And they were going up against a team in Sheffield United, a team in Burnley, a team in Luton, who were probably giving you chances every 5 seconds. So Forest have continued to improve, added the goals, and then this is exactly who they are. And fair play to them because it's been a fantastic start.
I think when you look at the attacking side as well, that has massively improved this season. You look at someone like Callum Hudson-Odoi, and his influence on the side is just getting bigger and bigger. Against West Ham United, he created 4 chances, which was more than any other player on the pitch, but he completed 35 out of his 36 passes in the final third, which was the most of any player in the Premier League this weekend. So the way that they're developing from that defence-first approach, and now we're seeing them be electric in the final third with those players we've spoken about. It's kind of exciting.
I also keep reading, Graham, that they want to use Villa as their kind of benchmark, actually, and how Villa, as a promoted club within 4 years of being promoted, got themselves into the Conference League, didn't they, last year, and now into the Champions League, and actually very similar. And maybe the rules were slightly different when Villa did this, but when Villa got promoted, they spent a ridiculous. I mean, they threw the kitchen sink at the players they brought in at that stage under Dean Smith through necessity. Forest did the same. I know there's all the PSR rules and stuff, but that's who I've read that they are looking towards to try and follow in their footsteps.
Which is a high benchmark, in fairness, but
Yeah.
I think it indicates the ambition there. They just appointed Edu, or they're in the process of appointing Edu, so that's another indication of the ambition they have. I think the owner wants to succeed. He's had success in Greece, so he wants to do that in the Premier League. I think Nedum's absolutely right in terms of how they've transitioned from the team that looks a little bit chaotic from the outside in the early stages of their life in the Premier League, which isn't straightforward. We can see going from a Championship into the Premier League, there's no formula there to go, how do we survive this? They've done it by signing lots of players. Some of them have been good, some of them have been not so good, but I think they've settled on something now. They look structured, they look organised. As a club, they've made really, really good recruitment decisions in the summer, and they're in a fantastic position.
We will end it there, Graham, Statman, Nedum. Thank you very much. Reminder: you can contact us via WhatsApp +44 330 678 1078. All the details are on the website. You can email us. You can email us as well. planetpremierleague@bbc.co.uk. A reminder: you can listen to this on BBC Sounds as well as your favourite podcast provider. So please do subscribe, download, send us your thoughts and questions. And it has been an IMG production for BBC Sounds.